Good evening, everyone. Today we're going to be doing lesson 5, so we're going to be starting on page 184 in your book. Sorry? No? Second to last year. Homework class next week. Here's Hashem. Important class next week. Next week's going to be Perek Lamavez, all about obviously so. And even if you think you know Perek Lamavez, we'll take you on a journey, Here's Hashem. Okay. So, we've had 4 lessons up until this point, and in the 4 lessons, we've kind of established how to get rid of atzvos. In lesson 1, we established the importance of simcha, of being happy, and the problem with being happy is that we're unhappy. I know that sounds simplistic, but when you're unhappy, you can't be happy. To use another analogy, imagine that you're in your car, and you're pushing the gas, and you want to move forward. The car should be moving forward, right? But what if hooked to your backside is an 18-wheeler, and it is pulling the car in the other direction. So you can push your gas pedal from today till tomorrow, the car is not going to budge. The same thing is also, we could be pushing the pedal, I want to be besimcha, but the negative emotions that we're experiencing, known as atzvos, is pulling us in the opposite direction, and we can't really be besimcha if we are being bogged down by atzvos. So, the first thing we have to do is we have to get rid of the atzvos, and that we've done. Okay, at least theoretically, we've done that over the last lessons. We've talked about how to deal with the negative emotions that come from material issues. We've talked about shame. We've talked about guilt. To put it in different words, we've unhooked the tractor trailer from the back of our cars, which is nice. But it doesn't necessarily translate into actual happiness. How do we become happy? So let's start with exercise 5.2 on page 184. I would be happier if. What would make you happier? Now, I know that I'm teaching a bunch of men over here, and no one here is vulnerable enough to share anything, so I'm not going to expect that. But take a moment to think about that, because we're going to return to this exercise later on in this lesson, and I'm going to want, when we get there, I'm going to want you to go back and think about that which you responded over here. If I were to tell you, give me 3 things that would make, if these three things were to happen, would make you a happier person, what would they be? Okay, moving on. So, let's go back and let's talk a little about the source of everything. Over the last few lessons, what we've established, what we've come to see, is that atzvos is a function of the nefesh habahamis pretty much. Now, when we have negative emotions, the nefesh habahamis doesn't like it. So the nefesh habahamis also tries to avoid negative emotions. But while the nefesh habahamis deals with atzvos, usually by trying to reduce the cause of the negative feeling. So for example, if you're feeling guilt, so how does the nefesh habahamis deal with it? It tries to minimize the guilt. Dealing with shame, tries to minimize the shame. If you have issues or problems or suffering in life, well, the way to get rid of it is to suffer less. What can I do to resolve those issues and the suffering? What we saw is the nefesh elokis perspective, it shifts our perspective in a way that makes the problem irrelevant. It's a very different way. I'm feeling shame. It's not that I'm going to try to deal with the cause and minimize the shame. There's nothing what to feel shame about. Or suffering, by shifting our perspective so that we have an nefesh elokis perspective, and what's important is kirvas elokim, closeness to Hashem, the whole cause becomes irrelevant. What we're going to do is, we're going to do the same thing when it comes to happiness. We're going to find out that the nefesh elokis and nefesh habahamis have very different approaches to happiness, and we're going to see that the nefesh elokis path is going to be the path to happiness, which, by the way, it's not intuitive necessarily, because you think into it. What makes you happy? A trip to Europe is going to make you happy. A nice house is going to make you happy. All these things that make us happy usually are associated with the nefesh habahamis. Nefesh elokis, if we had to associate nefesh elokis with one word, would it be happiness or would it be a different word? You'd say nefesh habahamis brings me happiness. Nefesh elokis is about duty, responsibility, obligation. We don't look necessarily to Nefesh Elokis as the source of our happiness. So it might be a little counterintuitive what we're going to be learning about in this lesson today, but by the time we finish, we're going to see, Tanya, the Nefesh Elokis is not only the path to the Eibishter and to mission and purpose in life, but it's actually also the path to happiness. Okay, so we need to analyze the difference between Nefesh HaBahamis, the way it pursues happiness, and the Nefesh Elokis and the way it pursues happiness, and then we'll compare and contrast the two and see which one is the more sustainable and lasting one. So that takes us straight to our next exercise on page 5.3. Describe 3 ways in which the Nefesh HaBahamis achieves happiness and positive emotions. Okay, this is something which is a theoretical question. Any answers? What are different ways in which the Nefesh HaBahamis achieves happiness and positive emotions?
Pleasures in life.
Pleasures in life, okay. Anything else? Is that it? Okay, we can stick with that. I think there's also more than that. There's what?
Kina, Taiva, and Kavod.
Okay, Kina, Taiva, and Kavod. Okay, I don't know if it gains happiness through Kina, but we can go with Taiva, and Kavod, right? It gets honor and recognition and validation. So definitely an Nefesh HaBahamis way to happiness, and also Taiva, which is indulging our desires. Okay. Does that work? Does that actually bring us happiness? So let's read a text over here, a fascinating text. I think this might be the first secular text we're reading, maybe not. Text 1, page 187. People briefly react to good and bad events. This is written by a psychologist and a professor. But in brief time, they return to neutrality. Thus, happiness and unhappiness are merely short-lived reactions to changes in people's circumstances. People continue to pursue happiness because they incorrectly believe that greater happiness lies just around the next corner, in the next goal accomplished, the next social relationship obtained, or the next problem solved. Because new goals continually capture one's attention, one constantly strives to be happy without realizing that in the long run, such efforts are futile. Okay, so the Nefesh HaBahamis' quest for happiness is somewhat doomed to failure. And why is this so? So we're going to talk about 2 reasons for this. 2 reasons why the Nefesh HaBahamis, the path to Nefesh HaBahamis happiness, whether it's through Taiva, whether it's through Kavod, whether it's any other accomplishment, achievement, or attainment, why it's not going to bring you happiness. For the first one, we're going to read a very famous letter from the Rebbe. Text 2, page 188. It's a public letter that the Rebbe wrote, if I recall correctly, in 1972. The Rebbe writes as follows. When a plant is fully provided with all that it requires for growth, earth, water, air, etc., it is liberated from all of its worries and concerns, so to speak. Although it is immobile, doomed to remain rooted in place for its entire lifespan, it nevertheless enjoys the full freedom that a plant can experience. As long as it remains no more than a plant, it is truly free despite its lack of mobility. An animal, however, is a different story. Even if its needs for food, drink, etc. were to be provided, it would feel horribly restricted, imprisoned in the harshest manner, if it were to be immobilized and forced to forever remain in one place, for it would be denied one of the primary features of its existence. Now, the primary feature of a human being is its intelligence. Humans would feel imprisoned even if granted full freedom of mobility if they were denied the primary aspect of being, the freedom to utilize their intelligence and live mindfully. What is the underlying message over here? Is that here the Rebbe is talking about the context of freedom, but I think we all understand, what's the famous, give me freedom or give me death, right? That without freedom there can't be happiness. And what is freedom predicated upon? And therefore what is happiness predicated upon? Is a full self-expression. Fully expressing one's potential, one's ability. So for example, an animal, if you give an animal everything that a rock has, or everything that a plant has, so it's not going to be happy. It needs to move around because that's part of what it is. A human being, if you stick a human being in a barn and give it hay and or even good food a whole day, it's also not going to be fulfilled. Why? Because a human being is blessed with intelligence and it needs to actualize that in order to feel fulfilled as a human being. And within a human being itself also. So for example, if you give a 2-year-old a 20-piece puzzle, it'll spend an hour on it and feel completely fulfilled because it is using out its abilities. But if you give an adult a 20-piece puzzle, that's a frustrating experience, okay? The adult needs a 2,000-piece puzzle. Now, You have to realize the 20-piece puzzle is an accomplishment because it's not something which a rat can do. It's certainly not something which a tree can do or a slab of granite. In other words, but ultimately everything needs to feel fulfilled. So, the same thing is when it comes to human being. We have, as human beings, it's not only we have intellect, but as Deborah points out, and we'll see it soon, we have a need for higher needs. A human being has a need for spirituality, for meaning in life. It's not enough that we live a life of pleasure and have cars and have vacations and have homes. A human being with all of that is going to be miserable. He is not self-actualizing. Self-actualizing the human nature of needing more than that in life. And by the way, which is something which is quite interesting. A fascinating mimer from the Alter Rebbe, text 3, the Mamari Admura Zaken Akhtsarim. Alter Rebbe writes, wild beasts and animals are always happy because their spiritual life force is compatible with their bodies to a degree neither greater nor less than how they are created. So they're comfortable in their own skin always. Not so humans, regarding whom it is stated, how many understand that the sacred spirit of the human being soars higher, while the spirit of the beast within the human descends lower? The incompatible desires creates the possibility that the unique human spirit will find itself suffering incarceration within the corporeal body that drags the person lower. An animal doesn't have an issue of not being able to self-express because its body and its soul are perfectly compatible. The human being, on the other hand, has that issue, that struggle, and therefore the possibility that the potential human being will never be realized, which will lead to a place of not having self-actualization. I want to point out that this course, I think I mentioned in the past, is a medically accredited course. Meaning doctors and psychologists take this course and they get their medical credit. So, as part of the process of doing this, and that's why if you look at the end of every single lesson, there's also appendixes which will talk about the mental health angle of this. So this way the doctors, they come to the shluchim, they take these courses, and they need these credits. It's called, what are they called? CMEs. CMEs, continuing medical education. So one of the things is that we need to get these lessons reviewed by mental health experts. Okay, so Baruch Hashem, we have that in place. We have a very wonderful mental health expert who is at a very high position in the NIH, National Institute of Health. He reviewed this course, and when he got to this, he writes me an email. I'm bothered by this. He says, because we know for a fact, he says he's bothered by this reading from the Alter Rebbe. He says we know for a fact that some animals get depressed and they have to take medication and Prozac. And here the Alter Rebbe says that animals are always b'simcha. Sorry? Yeah. No, what do we do with that? So the first thing we do with that is we know the Alter Rebbe is right? That's... So I turned to him, I responded by email, I said, let me ask you a question. How do they do these tests? He says, yeah, they do it on lab rats. I said, lab rats? That's proving my point. Because the lab rat is not allowed self-expression. It's stuck in a cage. Of course it's going to be depressed. The Alter Rebbe is talking here about animals in the wild. The Alter Rebbe is talking about an animal that's its natural self. They're not constrained. Now you're bringing me a proof of an animal that's in a zoo or in a lab. Yes, that animal is going to suffer like a human being. Just like Alter Rebbe is saying, human being, we can suffer that incarceration that we can't self-express because of that conflict we have within us. Animals can also, but the animals naturally don't suffer. And he said, yeah, you're right. We've never done any tests on animals in the wild, so there's no way of saying that animals in the wild will suffer from depression. Akapana. And then Alter Rebbe Taka continues. Oh, sorry, we're not there. Now, here's the important thing to understand. That's why this is, the hedonic. It's called the hedonic the treadmill. That people that are constantly, right, and they don't feel fulfilled. They don't feel fulfilled. There's a big Hollywood actor. His name is Jim Carrey. And when I was doing this lesson, so I looked him up. His estimated net worth is $150 million. And he said, I think everyone should get rich and famous and do everything they ever dreamed of so they can see that it's not the answer. So he writes, this is fascinating. We're busy chasing all of that, but we're not realizing that that doesn't allow us to self-express. The human being needs more than that. All of that is not going to, and by the way, you have all these rich and famous people who are addicted and on drugs and overdosing and suicidal and more so than the regular population. You wonder why is that? And I think the answer is very pashut. Because most of us, nebach, us poor people, we don't have everything we want. We have nothing that we want, right? So we're convinced that the reason why I'm not happy is because I don't have that yet. So we're busy chasing that and assuming that we'll get happy. But what happens when you get all of that and you're still not happy? Then you turn to drugs. Because you have no other brainer. And again, because we're missing this basic self-actualization. And here's an important thing to understand. The Nefesh HaBahamis itself has higher needs. The Nefesh HaBahamis itself is not going to be happy with eating steak every night and going on vacation. It'll be miserable. So even a goy who lives a life which is purely a gashmiistic, as a human being, the goy is going to be miserable. Now add to this equation something else. We're Yidden. We have a Nefesh Elikis. And the Nefesh Elikis is the primary being of who we are. And if we don't actualize the Nefesh Elikis, of course we're going to be miserable. As the Rebbe, by the way, continues in that letter which we said earlier. You don't have it in your book, but I'll read it to you. Yidden, was jeder einer von sie hat a Nefesh Elikis, a chelik elekam mimal mamish. Yidden, who every one of them has a Nefesh Elikis, a piece of Hashem from above. Welche afilu, wenn sie is angetan, the Nefesh HaBahamis und ein Guf, is he verbunden mit dem Ebersten, even when it is in the Nefesh HaBahamis and in the body, it's connected to Hashem, mit ein Soy for the infinite, is ihr drang zu ihr emesse Freiheit, Yitzias Mitzrayim. It means it's full freedom. It's Yitzias Mitzrayim. As long as you're not actualizing your Nefesh Elikis and serving the Eberster, you're going to be miserable. A goy can find satisfaction by living a meaningful life. A Yid needs more than a meaningful life. A Yid needs to satisfy the Nefesh Elikis. Again, positive emotion and happiness are contingent upon full self-expression. And by the way, interestingly, it works the other way around also. What if because I have a Nefesh Elikis, Nefesh HaBahamis, what if I only satisfy my Nefesh Elikis and not my Nefesh HaBahamis? I also can't be happy. What's the raya for this? A Torah raya for that. Ein simcha, ela b'basar b'yayin. Comes Shabbos, we don't say go daven the whole day in shul. No, come here to a lesson. By the way, Shabbos, beautiful kiddush over here, right? Yeah, you want to be happy on Shabbos, you want to have Nefesh HaBahamis also has to be taken care of. Because again, full self-expression. But if you're only taking care of your Nefesh HaBahamis, it's a bigger problem. Why? Because at the end of the day, for a Yid, what's your Iker Mitzias? What's your main identity is your Nefesh Elikis. So if you don't take care of your Nefesh HaBahamis, it's not as bad as you don't take care of your Nefesh Elikis. But both of them have to be taken care of in a balanced life. That's one Nakuda. But then there's another Nakuda. There's another reason. So the Nefesh HaBahamis way of getting happiness, which is just by pursuing taiva and kovid, it doesn't satisfy your Nefesh Elikis. It doesn't satisfy, and you lack that self-expression. And then there's another point, which is, let's look at exercise 5.4, page 191. List 3 things that at one point in your life brought you considerable happiness. What's something that happened that made you very happy? Let's say maybe the first time you got a smartphone, maybe the first time you got a car. You finished a Masechta, I don't know, a difficult Masechta, whatever it may be. How long did that happiness last for? How long did that excitement and that joy last for?
2 days a week.
My first child.
Your first child, you still feeling the happiness?
Certainly. Nachmer.
Nachmer.
With the other einiglich.
I hear. But you understand what I'm saying. And this brings us to a Maimer Chazal, text 4. Famous Maimer Chazal. No one leaves this world even half of their cravings fulfilled. Rather, one who has 100 coins longs to turn it into 200. And one who indeed attains the 200 longs to turn it into 400. You realize what's going on over here? Think about it for a second, by the way. If you have 100, how much do you want? 200. So if you have 200, how much do you want? 400. Why? It should be 300. In other words, when you had 100, you wanted 100 more. Now you have 200, you should also want 100 more. Guess what? The more you have, suddenly the more you need. And this has been empirically proven in study after study. Having more things doesn't make you happier. Doesn't make you happier. Basically, what we're doing is every single time we have this happiness, we get something, and then what's the next thing that lasts for, that's the adrenaline, that lasts for a little while. And then before we know it, we're like, but what's the next thing? Yeah, I have my phone, very cool. That lasts for a week, then happiness. And I'm like, but he has a better phone than me. I got my car, very nice, but it's only a Honda, right? I want something, whatever. I finished one Masechta, but how many Masechtas? In other words, the Nefesh HaBahamis essentially sabotages happiness because it's never happy with what it has. It always immediately turns around and is looking for what's the next thing that I need, and I'm miserable because I don't have that. So let's put it in different words. The first thing that we said earlier was, we said that the Nefesh HaBahamis way to happiness doesn't work. Why? Because it's not satisfying the Nefesh HaLekis, and you have to fully self-express the Nefesh HaLekis. Now what we're saying here is something else. It's not only that the problem is that you're not expressing the Nefesh HaLekis. The Nefesh HaBahamis itself self-sabotages whatever you have, right? You know, if you want, I have money, I want more money. I have a good relationship, I want a better relationship. You know, my kid is the vice president of the United States, I want him to be the president of the United States. If he's the president of the United States, I want him to be the king of the world, right? I've attained spiritual greatness, I want more. In other words, to put it in different words, the greatest impediment to happiness is the quest for happiness itself. The quest makes us miserable because it's always busy telling us what we don't have. And every once in a while we take a break from that miserableness because we got our next goal, and it takes around 2-3 days till we go back to our miserableness. Which takes us to the ending of what Alter Rebbe says in the Maimer, text 5, page 193. By the way, it's in Yiddish. It's very powerful if you can understand it. One who is consumed with self-focus is more miserable. For the more important a person considers himself, the more misery he experiences at his preoccupation with lowly matters. For heaven's sake, do not attempt to attain happiness through focusing on yourself. We must be happy, but the happiness must flow from the connection to the unconcealed truth of the neshama. When the ego no longer conceals the neshama, joy is automatically. The Rebbe says, "Rak leman Hashem nitzu nemen hasimcha mit dem ich." You have to forget about the ich if you want simcha. If you're focused on the ich, on myself, on who I am, then you're constantly, I want this, I want that, I want the other. So what we see over here is the Nefesh HaBahamis way of arriving at happiness is doomed to failure. Number one, it doesn't allow your Nefesh HaLekis to self-express. Number two, it itself is not really a vehicle for happiness. That leaves us the option of the Nefesh HaLekis way of happiness. What is the Nefesh HaLekis way of happiness? What makes the Nefesh HaLekis way of happiness different from the Nefesh HaBahamis way of happiness is not that the Nefesh HaBahamis wants material attainments and the Nefesh HaLekis wants spiritual attainments. That's not what differentiates them. Because, by the way, the Nefesh HaBahamis can also want spiritual attainments. If you desire to finish Shas, that's a Nefesh HaBahamis desire. 99.9% of the time. The difference between Nefesh HaLekis and Nefesh HaBahamis is the Nefesh HaBahamis wants attainments. And the word attainments doesn't exist in the dictionary of the Nefesh HaLekis.
What?
The word attainments doesn't exist.
What?
Sorry?
I'm not familiar with that word.
Attainments,
Yeah.
accomplishments, achievements, something to attain something. Yeah. The Nefesh HaLekis doesn't have a bucket list. It doesn't have its, I want to accomplish this and that and the other. And it doesn't ask Hashem what Hashem can do for it. It only asks what it can do for Hashem. The Nefesh HaLekis at every single moment is busy asking, what am I here to do to accomplish for Hashem? Not what can I get or attain. It's about service versus attainments. A little concept of this. Let's look at text 6 from the Alter Rebbe, from Tanya, Perek Mem Aleph. The Alter Rebbe writes, when we learn Torah and we daven, we surrender our souls to Hashem, meaning we elevate the spark of godliness within us to its source. Our intention in doing so should be solely for the sake of causing Hashem nachas. The nachas we cause Hashem can be compared to the joy that a king experiences when his only child, who was in captivity or imprisonment, is released and returned to him, as we discussed earlier. Every Jewish neshama truly and authentically aspires to please Hashem at all times by virtue of the natural love for Hashem that we inherited from our ancestors. The neshama wants to make Hashem happy, wants to give Hashem nachas. Why is this such a game changer? So there's a somewhat famous story which illustrates this idea very well. The Mendel Futterfass, when he was in Siberia. So in Siberia there was all the lowlife thugs and criminals, but there was also the who's who of Russia was also in Siberia. To realize that if you were a thinker, and if you and because you thought too much, and you had opinions actually, so the regime considered you to be a danger, so they sent you away. So the Mendel had plenty of friends who were from the high society in Russia. And one day they're sitting around, and one of them turns to the Mendel and says, Mendel, tell us, why are you always so happy? How are you always so happy? And the Mendel responds, as a Jew always responds, why are you guys miserable? It's almost like the end of the Gemara and the end of Tanya, right? And why are you crying? Right? The story of Rabbi Kiva. They're like, really? You don't understand why we're miserable? No, tell me, why are you miserable? So they go around, each one says, one says, I was a writer and I was in the middle of writing a book. And that's it. Manuscript, gone. Another, I'm a doctor, I was busy healing people. That's it, I can't do that anymore. Another one says, I was a physicist, busy working on this incredible invention. Whatever, they went around. And then when they finished, the Mendel says, okay, I get it. Says, you're all miserable because you had a certain goal in life. And this incarceration, the fact that you're here, is impeding your ability to accomplish that goal. My goal in life is to serve Hashem. And I can serve Hashem here just as well as I serve Hashem in Moscow. Because serving Hashem means, by definition, at every single moment asking yourself, what does Hashem want of me right now? With whatever tools that I have. So I can serve Hashem wherever I am. So that's why I'm happy. The happiness of the Nefesh Elokis is in serving the Eibishter. Let's put it in somewhat different words. The Nefesh HaBahamis is constantly focused on the big picture. Think about it for a second. Nefesh HaBahamis is big picture. Nefesh Elokis is very, very small picture. I'll explain to you what that means. Big picture means Nefesh HaBahamis has big plans for ourselves. The plans started many years ago. The plans extend many years in the future. What I'm going to be, who I'm going to be, what I'm going to accomplish. And every single moment in life is part of that photo album which we're building, right? That big photo album which is going to reach its climax. We're going to look back at our life and look how accomplished I am and everything. Which, by the way, just an interesting idea. That's why the Nefesh HaBahamis is never really present in the moment. This moment, think about yourself, right now, if I waste 30 seconds, what's make a difference? Big deal. Why? Because in terms of my larger perspective of my life and what I want to accomplish, what does 30 seconds mean? Which is why time flies. Why does time fly? Because if this moment is never really important, so you're always just busy running through this moment. This moment is only just a brief moment on the way from the past to the future. But if the Nefesh Elokis is about serving the Eibishter, these 30 seconds is 30 seconds when I actually serve the Eibishter. Why are they not important? In fact, the Nefesh Elokis, what happened yesterday is irrelevant. What happened tomorrow is irrelevant. What happens tomorrow is irrelevant because all of those are just part of my ego, part of my... But if my ego is not important, it's about serving the Eibishter, the only thing that really matters is what's happening right now at this moment. Which is why the Nefesh HaBahamis is busy with his camera, all the times, by the way, taking pictures. Because pictures is the ultimate symptom of not living in the moment. Think about it for a second. If you ever went to you went to a petting zoo, you took your kid or your animal, 5-year-old, they're busy, they pet the goat, and then you say, oh my gosh, we didn't take the picture. Okay, Moshe, go pet the goat again. How many times did it happen that your kid said, oh Ma, I petted the goat, but you didn't take a picture. Let me do it again. Go take a picture. Why doesn't that happen? Because the kid is in the moment. Because the kid is in the moment, so picture. A picture is when you're not in the moment, what you're doing right now, but you're already thinking about your photo album. You're thinking about in 3 years from now, if you're in the moment, why are you taking pictures? This is not something, I'm not against pictures, but the Nekuda is, the Nefesh Elokis, it's not about 3 years from later, it's not about it's right now serving the Eibishter, it's living in the moment. Now, the Nefesh HaBahamis is only happy if everything is proceeding according to plan. I put a plan, I set out a plan for myself when I was 13 or 15 or 18, how my life, the trajectory of how my life is going to go, and where I'm going to advance, and how I'm going to gain, how much money I'm going to have, and how much covet I'm going to have, and all those other things, and how many cars I'm going to have, and how good my relationship is going to be, and how many mesechtas I'm going to learn. And then, Nefesh HaBahamis looks at itself in the mirror, and what are the chances that it looks and says, hey, everything's going according to plan. I have exactly what I wanted, I've accomplished everything I wanted to. Who here can say that? If the whole world was here, sitting here in this room, no one would raise their hand. So of course Nefesh HaBahamis is miserable. But the Nefesh Elokis, because it's all about self, and no one ever looks in the mirror and says, wow, yeah, that's who I want to be. But the Nefesh Elokis Doesn't care about what it looks like in the mirror. Nefesh Elokis doesn't look at it in the mirror. The Nefesh Elokis is only thinking, what does the Eibishter need? And right now, I can do a mitzvah. And that's all that counts. And that's what's going to give me happiness, is doing the mitzvah. How is that? How is a mitzvah going to give me happiness if I'm living a Nefesh Elokis life? Let's take a look at a very famous piece of Tanya, Perek Lamed Gimel, text 7. The meaning of the pasuk, Yismach Yisrael ba'esav, let Israel rejoice with its maker, is that whoever is of Jewish stock ought to rejoice in Hashem's own simcha. For Hashem rejoices and is happy to dwell in the lowest realm, our physical world. That means the Nefesh Elokis does a mitzvah and takes joy in Hashem's joy. Poshet shears in the simcha of Hashem. It's not about me. The moment that you remove yourself from the picture, all the atzvus goes away, and there's only simcha. It's about enjoying Hashem's simcha. Now you can ask, how can I enjoy Hashem's simcha? Why should I be happy that Hashem has a dir b'tachtonim? What would you answer to that? Let's see what the Alter Rebbe says. Text 8 from Tanya, Perek Memvav. You're all familiar with the words we say before we do a mitzvah. Asher kiddeshanu b'mitzvaysa, right? What does that mean? Literally, Asher kiddeshanu b'mitzvaysa means that He made us, page 196, He made us holy with His mitzvahs. But Alter Rebbe points out that the word kiddeshanu is also related to the word kiddushin, which means marriage. What's the connection? Alter Rebbe says, the phrase Asher kiddeshanu b'mitzvaysa, who has sanctified us with His commandments, implies that our bond with Hashem is like a man who betroths a woman, so that she may be united with him in a perfect bond, as it is written, and he shall cleave to his wife, and they shall be one flesh. Exactly so, and to an infinitely greater degree, is our Nefesh Elokis, along with the Nefesh Abrahamis, united with Hashem's infinite light when we engage in Torah, study, and the mitzvahs. And for that reason, Shlomo HaMelech in Shir Hashirim compares our union with Hashem to the union of a chassan and kala in all its particulars, with attachment, desire, pleasure, embracing, and kissing. Asher kiddeshanu b'mitzvaysav. Remember this next time you watch Nagelwasser. Asher kiddeshanu b'mitzvaysav, who marries us with His mitzvahs. We're married to Hashem, v'hoyu lebasar echad. And anyone who is in a marriage, I hope, would know what it means. The joy you take in your spouse's joy. That's what a relationship is. If you're in a marriage and you're like, oh, you're happy, okay, but why should I? What makes me happy? Oh, so I made you happy, great. Okay, now I have to think about, that's the greatest happiness. Think about it in context of other relationships also. You spoke about your first child, right? Talked about one of the biggest shifts. You have children, you said, remember, first child comes Cholamayit, right? So you have to do a trip for the Cholamayit. And by the way, I talk about this to people who don't have children yet. They don't really get it. And when people who don't have children think that married people, when it comes Cholamayit, so let's say the father and the mother, let's say they're not altakakers like me, let's say they're still young, 25, 26. So really what they would want to do is they'd want to go have fun. They'd want to go to something which is adult, style entertainment. They have kids, so they have to go to the kiddie park. But once you become a parent, you realize, no. You go to the kiddie park, and the kid goes on the seesaw, and the kid smiles, and for you, as a parent, that is the absolute best Cholamayit trip possible. Yeah. Seeing your kids happy is your happiness. That is your happiness. You're not sacrificing. It's not, Nebuch, I can't. No, there's nothing I'd rather do than be in that kindergarten and push my kid down that 36-inch slide. A relationship, by definition, means that you take joy in the joy of the other. If we're in a relationship with the Eibishter, we do a mitzvah and know that this mitzvah is causing the Eibishter tremendous nachas and pleasure because it brings dir b'tachtonim. That makes us happy. Which means at any given moment, if we're living, identified with the Nefesh Elokis, we have the ability to be completely besimcha by focusing on the simcha that we're giving the Eibishter through doing this mitzvah. So as it turns out, counterintuitively, we're all busy chasing happiness in the wrong way. We're busy chasing happiness with the tools of the Nefesh Abahamis. When actually the real way to be happy is through the tools of the Nefesh Elokis. The tools of the Nefesh Elokis, simcha is available at any moment because it's not about yesterday, it's not about tomorrow, it's not about me. It's about losing myself and giving the Eibishter nachas and taking pleasure in that. Now, here I am standing in front of you making it sound like it's easy and it's simple. We realize it's not simple. Because our default state is nefesh habahamis. Our default state is that we look for the happiness of the nefesh habahamis. And by the way, if we take a moment now, Taka, to go back to how we started this lesson, on page 184, exercise 5.2, I would be happier if. Can someone tell me over here, were your answers nefesh elokis or nefesh habahamis answers? Nefesh habahamis answers. Even if they weren't bad answers, they were nefesh habahamis answers. Nefesh habahamis answers. And moving away to the side of the nefesh elokis is very difficult. It goes against our very self. You're telling me, I have to lose my ego, I have to lose myself. We have an nefesh habahamis which is at full force, it's very strong. In fact, it gets stronger all the time. But, so moving away and moving to the nefesh elokis is hard. But what's the other option? Sticking with the nefesh habahamis, what does Einstein famously say? The famous what? So the definition of insanity is doing
the same thing over and over.
Doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. Well, that's what our life is all about. We're looking for happiness by way of nefesh habahamis, and when we don't accomplish it, we keep on doing it over and over and over, expecting different results, and we always get the same result. And it's not leaving us as happier people. It's time to make the shift. Now, we do have to remember that we're not talking about an all or nothing proposition. That's one of, I think we might have mentioned this in the past, that one of the biggest tricks of the nefesh habahamis is that it tries to trick us into, I can never accomplish it fully, so therefore, why even bother starting? You have to realize it's about making shifts. It's about a spectrum. Nefesh habahamis is here, nefesh elokis is here, and by the way, none of us are over here, and none of us, I'll take a guess, are over here. We're all somewhere in the middle. Meaning, no one sitting here in this room pays no attention to the nefesh elokis and doesn't identify at all the nefesh elokis. The question is, where am I? Nefesh elokis means how I identify with mission, with purpose, with serving the Eibishter. Nefesh habahamis is about how I prioritize myself and I put myself at the center of everything. And the more I move, the more I become more mission and more purpose, the more time I take during the day to actively think, I'm here to serve the Eibishter. That's my purpose, that's my joy. The more we are actually inviting happiness into our lives. That is the secret to happiness, is shifting to whatever degree possible, slowly but surely, shifting our consciousness and identity. Instead of thinking the whole time, was will ich, what do I want, is starting to think in terms of, what does the Eibishter want of me? Let me do that. Let me give the Eibishter happiness and finding the happiness in that. Now, one very important point to make, and a really beautiful idea in Tanya. Some of us might be thinking over here, yes, that's amazing. Everything we're saying in this class, I've been challenged by them. I'm not there. I'm not at that level. So we have to know that you can begin the journey even if you're not ready to begin. And what is the proof of this? What is the idea behind this? So to understand this, let's go back for a moment to Yetzias Mitzrayim. We know that when the Yidden finally left Mitzrayim after Makas Bechiras, the Mitzrayim, the Egyptians were very eager for them to leave. They encouraged them to leave. And then a few days later, we have the narrative shifts and changes very quickly. Text 10, from Parshas B'Shalach, Vayugad l'melech Mitzrayim ki baracham. Pari was told that the people had fled. So Pari and his servants experienced a change of heart regarding the people, and they exclaimed, what have we done? Why have we released Israel from serving us? So Pari harnessed his chariot and took his people with him, and he chased after the Bnei Yisrael. Talk about strange. This is literally what the 5 days after Pari is busy begging. The Zohar tells us, interestingly, that that the first thing that Pari did when he wakes up at Chatzos and finds out all of the Bechirim had died, is before he even went to Moshe, he killed all of his advisors, whoever told him not to let the Yidden go. That's how, that's what it says in the Zohar. And then Pari goes, get out of here, right? And suddenly, what's that? A few days later, look at this. Pari is told that the Yidden fled. What? He's told that the Yidden fled? No, what's Pshat? So Pshat is that what upset Pari was that he felt fooled. Because he was told that the Yidden are going for a 3-day journey. So Moshe told him. Now Moshe didn't lie. Moshe never said he's coming back. That's the truth. But there was definitely that implication over there that they were coming back. So even though Pari had agreed to send him, but when he found out that he was fooled, he was tricked. That's when he flew into a rage. But that raises the question. So the Rebbe asks, Periklam Adala, text 11a. This seems puzzling. Why was this manipulation necessary? If they had simply told Pari to set them free permanently, would he not have been compelled to let them go regardless? Imagine this conversation. He comes after the Makas Becheres, and Pari says, and Moshe says, we're going and we're leaving forever. Pari says, no. No, okay. Tomorrow, Makas, every second kid is dying. And the day after, every third kid is dying. At this point, Pari, the game is over. Why did Moshe have to make this game about 3 days? And had he not done it, then he would have spared himself the whole thing, a Pari coming and chasing them to the Yamsuf. So the Mefarshim Mikra, the Mefarshim talk about this and they give whatever answers they give. The Alter Rebbe gives a fascinating answer al pi Chassidus. Text 11b, page 200. At that time, the Bnei Yisrael still harbored in their hearts the full force of the Nefesh Bahamis' untamed ego. For their natural impurity did not disappear until Matan Torah. Nevertheless, their striving and desire was to set their divine souls free from their golos within the forces of evil and Klippa, which is represented by the tomb of Mitzrayim, and to attach to Hashem, as it is stated, Hashem is my strength and my fortress, my refuge on a day of distress. And by the way, the word refuge is menusi, the place I run away to, my escape. The Rebbe is telling us something very deep. Had Moshe Rabbeinu turned to Pari and says, Zaygazon, we're out of here. We're rid of you. That couldn't have happened because that wasn't a reflection of the spiritual reality. The spiritual reality was that even though the Yidden left Mitzrayim, Mitzrayim very much existed. The Yidden were still in the clutches of that tomb. They didn't get rid of the tomb of Mitzrayim until Matan Torah. So what they were doing essentially was they were escaping. They were escaping. Pari wasn't destroyed. Pari wasn't out of their lives. Pari wasn't eliminated. And in our lives also, if the Pari in our lives is the Nefesh Bahamis, when Mashiach comes, so then let's say goodbye, we're gone forever, you're gone, you're over with, you're eliminated. But until that time, we have to contend with the Pari, the Mitzrayim within ourselves. But you know what we do? We do a Yetzias Mitzrayim, we escape. You know when we escape? When we stand up in the morning and we daven, that's a Yetzias Mitzrayim. And then after davening, we sit down with our Sefer and we learn a little, that's Yetzias Mitzrayim. The Pari is not gone. And the Pari is still there. Like, when are you coming back? When are you coming back, right? As we all know. You sit and you do a mitzvah. That's your Yetzias Mitzrayim. Your Pari is not gone. But our day is a series of moments of escape. Mehaltenish by them. We're not in that madriga. Holding in that madriga is Mashiach. Holding in the madriga is when we got rid of the Pari. We got rid of the... And that's why when Mashiach comes and says, we're not running, we're not escaping. Why? There's nothing to escape from when Mashiach comes. But when Pari, we needed to escape because symbolically, that's what it's all about. And you might say, so what is the big celebration all about? Well, ask yourself that, Mitzvah Hashem, next year it comes along Pesach, we'll be sitting by the Seder table, and we're all excited, we're celebrating Yetzias Mitzrayim, but you're like, Pari still exists. Yeah. But Yetzias Mitzrayim, we still celebrate even though Pari still exists. We still celebrate every single mitzvah and take joy in every mitzvah and every time we daven and every single time we learn Torah, even though our Pari also still exists. And that's why Yetzias Mitzrayim is such an important part of who we are, and Zechiras Yetzias Mitzrayim, because ultimately what is Yetzias Mitzrayim about? It's about not something that happened 3,300 years ago. Yetzias Mitzrayim is what happens every single day. Every single countless times a day when we run away from the Nefesh Bahamis with all of its priorities and all its ways of arriving at Simcha, and instead saying, I'm running away and I'm going to get a Simcha in the way that Nefesh is. Yeah, my desire for a new car and the thought that that's going to bring me happiness is not going away until I become a tzaddik or until Mashiach comes. But you know what? I can escape that and go find refuge right now in learning a piece of Gemara, learning a Maimer Chassidus, and finding the joy of the Nefesh Elikis. That is the idea of Yetzias Mitzrayim. And we'll conclude with one final idea. based on everything that we learned today, it seems, and more than seems, Hazay is, the Nefesh Bahamis is the biggest impediment to happiness. It's the funny, right? Your Nefesh Bahamis is stopping you from being happy. Because it's stopping you from fully self-expressing. It's stopping you from being happy with what you have, because it always wants more. So, wouldn't we be better off without the Nefesh Bahamis? And by the way, if I shift to Nefesh Elokis perspective, then I'm even more miserable than Nefesh Bahamis. Oh my gosh, I'm stuck with this pottery, this Mitzrayim inside me. Alter Rebbe tells us, Peter Lamadal, Alter Rebbe tells us, actually, your Nefesh Bahamis, and even your frustration about that you have about your Nefesh Bahamis, can all be leveraged to reach a greater state of Simcha. The Nefesh Bahamis on its own is a source of misery. However, there's a way to leverage Nefesh Bahamis that actually it should bring you to a greater level of Simcha. How was that? It's a long reading, but let's read it inside. Page 201. To gain a powerful dose of consolation, we should take to heart and tell ourselves, it is undoubtedly true. I am extremely distant from Hashem. I am loathsome, repulsive, and so on due to my naturally low spiritual stature. But that is only my body and the Nefesh Bahamis. Despite all that, there exists within me an actual part of Hashem. And for even I have it because even the most worthless have it, even a Kal Shebekala. I have the Nefesh Elokis, which has a spark of Elokus Mamish that gives it its life. Unfortunately, however, the Nefesh Elokis, languishes in a state of exile within me. In that case, I should shift my focus from feeling crushed at my lowly spiritual state to the contrary. The more that I am distant from Hashem and consider myself despicable and repulsive as a result, the more intensely is my Nefesh Elokis mired in gullus within me, and how tremendously is she to be pitied. I will therefore throw my every effort and determination to extracting her and lifting her out of this exile, to restore her to her father's house as in her youth, meaning to restore her to the state that she enjoyed before she was installed within my body. Back then, my neshama was absorbed in Hashem's blessed light and was completely united with Him. And that is exactly what will happen now as well, because I will invest all my efforts and all the faculties of my Nefesh Bahamis into Torah and mitzvahs, and especially in davening, during which time I will allow expression to my Nefesh Elokis. She can cry out to Hashem over her distress at her state of exile. So bottom line is, the more I realize how disgusting my Nefesh Bahamis is, the more I realize the gullus my Nefesh Elokis is in, and therefore I'm more determined to do what I can, to learn Torah and do mitzvahs, to a Yetzias Mitzrayim, to take my neshama out of its gullus. With this approach, we serve Hashem with tremendous simcha throughout our lives, rejoicing with our Nefesh Elokis as it is repeatedly rescued from the loathsome body and is restored to her father's home, as in her pristine youth, every time we engage in learning Torah and Avodas Hashem. And there is no greater joy than being rescued from exile and captivity. It has been compared to the tremendous joy of a prince who languished in captivity, where he was forced to labor at grinding with a millstone in prison while wallowing in repulsive filth. And he is then set free and returned to the palace of his father the king. Our body will remain in its repulsive and loathsome state. Indeed, the Zohar refers to the body as Mishcha Dechivya, the serpent skin, because the core essence of our Nefesh Bahamis will not have been converted to good, nor merged into holiness. Nevertheless, our neshama will be far more precious to us than our despised body, and we will therefore share in her joy. We will not allow the misery of the body to disturb or confuse the joy of our neshama. So I was saying something very powerful. I have an Nefesh Bahamis. The lowlier, more disgusting my Nefesh Bahamis is, the greater the gullus of my Nefesh Elokis. The greater the gullus of my Nefesh Elokis, the greater the joy that it experiences every time I do a mitzvah. Imagine, like he says, the joy of the prince who's sitting in prison, wallowing in filth, forced to do menial labor, and then then one day comes, it's freed and goes back to his father. That is the joy of the neshama. Every time you learn Torah, you do a mitzvah, you daven. But remember, the worse the captivity, the worse the prison, the greater the simcha. So the Nefesh Bahamis, which seemingly is a source of frustration and misery, if I'm focused on bringing the joy of my neshama and the joy of Hashem, because by the way, it works the other way around also. Think about the father, the king. When the son returns to the prince returns to the king, how great is the simcha of the king? Well, the worse the galus, the worse that was the imprisonment, the greater the simcha. So the worse the imprisonment of your neshama, your neshama is the greater simcha for Hashem, the greater the simcha for the neshama, the greater your simcha. Your neshama can actually be leveraged to bring you a greater simcha every single time that you serve Hashem. And conclude with Avart. Text 13. Shira Malis, right? When Hashem will return the exiles of Zion, we'll have been like dreamers. And then our mouth will be filled with laughter, our tongue with songs of joy. And then they will say among the nations, Hashem has done great things for these people. Hashem has done great things for us, and we were joyful. So on a simple level, Hashem is a response. The Goyim say, the Goyim say, Hashem has done great things for these people. And we respond, yeah, Hashem has done great things for us, and this has made us happy. But there's a part that's brought down Chiddush Svarim, that we respond to the Goyim, Hashem Tak has done great things for us. And you know why? Because Ayinu Smechim. Because even when we were in Golos, we were happy. What?
The Rebbe says it's a place of art.
The Rebbe says it's a Pelos of art, yeah. The Rebbe says, yeah.
What did you say? Praise Hashem.
The Rebbe says, Ki besimcha seitzeyu. You're going out of Golos, it has to be besimcha. And not only going out of the big Golos, but going out of our personal Golos, it has to be taka with simcha. That's the way to get out of Golos. But again, realizing the way to simcha, we have to throw away the paradigm, what we think that brings us happiness. All those things that we think bring us happiness, they're futility. And realize the ultimate way to happiness is nefshel kis. Focusing on our service to the Eibishter and taking simcha in that. Sei gesund. Next week.